and let the mountains fall. So we know this is true. I know that. So we're going to be continuing in the end story of the Gospels. But before we do, I want to start with the Old Testament and bring it back to you a little bit. So if you can find it, turn to Ezekiel chapter 47, please. Ezekiel. It's right before Daniel. Right before Daniel, but Ezekiel in the Old Testament, some of you hopefully still read the Old Testament. It has importance, and I want to develop a context here for you. Before we read, we're going to read just maybe the first number of verses. It depends on how far I want to go. Then we're going to go to John. So, when Babel happened, there was the dispersing of people to follow after their own gods. They were sent after, they were going out, and they went and they created their own nations. And it says, each according to the sons of the number of Elohim that were there. So they were false gods, but they were real gods, lowercase g gods, lowercase e Elohim, if you were to want to use the Hebrew in it. But they were sent out to follow their gods. And good Lord, if we don't see that now, people following after their gods, there is no other time in my life that I've not seen it more strongly. Just following, and Christians can go off and follow other gods. You choose today who you're going to serve. We have to trust today. And so the people, we should know from the history of it that God was like, okay, you go out and follow after those gods. You're going to have different language, whatever, but I'm going to claim this group of people, the nation of Israel, for myself. They weren't named yet at Babel. That came later. But he took them in, and what did they do? They lived so strong, we were valiant, and we're an amazing people, right? Nope. Kind of think they're a little bit like you and me, right? They had problems, they had struggles, they had doubt, they had fear. They would question God. They would wonder, does God even exist? In those seeds of doubt we talked a little bit about last week, where do we go with it? And like, how do we process it? And so in Ezekiel, it brings up, in my opinion, a reference back, but also a reference forward. So look at Ezekiel 47. We'll start with verse 1. And the headline in my Bible, it says, water flowing from the temple. And that's really my key point for this first part. Then he brought me back to the door of the temple, and behold, water was issuing forth below the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the temple faced east. The water was flowing down from below the south end of the threshold of the temple, south of the altar. When he brought me out by the way of the north gate and led me around on the outside to the outer gates that faces towards the east, and behold, the water was trickling out on the south side. Going on the eastward with a measuring line in his hand, the man measured, and this is one of these groups of verses that you can just go, blah, 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 measure how many, did anyone ever do that? Just like you're reading like, oh my goodness, what in the world? Please help me. All right, so just bear with me. I'm just going to go back to verse 3. I can't remember where it was. Going on eastward with a measuring line in his hand, the man measured 1,000 cubits that led me through the water, and it was ankle deep. Again, he measured 1,000 and led me through the water, and it was knee deep. Again, he measured 1,000, and he led me through the water, and it was waist deep. Again, he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not pass through, for the water had risen. It was deep enough to swim in, a river that could not be passed through. And he said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? Then he led me back to the bank of the river. And I went back, and I saw on the bank of the river very many trees on the one side and on the other. And what's that a sign of? Growth, right? Just lush vegetation, a sign of good water. And a little quick reference in the hit to people or trees. So just keep that in mind. And then he said, this water flows toward the eastern regions and goes down to the Arabah and enters the sea. And when it flows into the sea, the water will become fresh. So this is the Dead Sea, the Salt Sea. Got to have that understanding. So usually in Scripture, when you see it going eastward, it's going to a not good place. All right, so you have this prophecy in Ezekiel. He's saying that water is going to flow from the temple. And it's going to go down, and it's going to start off small, and it's going to get bigger and bigger, and then you're not even going to be able to cross it. And he said to me, this water flows toward the east region and goes down to Arabia and enters the sea, and then flows to the sea, and waters will become fresh. And whenever the river goes, every living creature that swarms will live, and there will be very many fish. For this water goes there, that the waters of the sea may become fresh. So everything will live where the river goes. Fishermen will stand beside the sea from En-gedi to En-eglaim. Probably pronounced that wrong. It will be a place for the spreading of nets. Its fish will be of very many kinds, like the fish of the great sea. But its swamps and marshes will not become fresh, because they are left for salt. And on the banks on both sides of the river, they will grow all kinds of trees for food. Their leaves will not wither. What do you think about when you hear that? Leaves will not wither. What? One person, life? Come on. They're dying? All right. Dad, come on, what does it make you think of? Psalm 1? I put him on the spot. And you shall be like trees by rivers of living water, which brings forth fruit in its season. Psalm 1. Nice try. Psalm 1. We're close. Trees of living water. This is what we are promised. But all they knew to be in that sea was dead. So their leaves will not wither, nor will their fruit fail. But they will bear fresh fruit every month, because the water for them flows from the sanctuary. Their fruit will be for food, and their leaves for healing. So this is a prophecy going forward. They didn't know when it's going to happen. I'm not going to read, but if you look at the next section, it's talking about the divisions of the land, how it was laid out, how the separations of the nations took place. It was giving people an idea, this is going this far and this far. And that's what happened at Babel. Nations took over land, area, it was well defined, and then what do people do? Like we still do these days? We just battle over stuff. They fight for land. They fight for power. They fight for control. Not much different than good old USA and others. So it is one of these things that back then I'm thinking they're going, what's up? A river's coming out of the temple, and it's going down into the Dead Sea. There's going to be a lot of trees. So what? So now turn your Bible over to John chapter 21. John 21. Good to hear some pages flip for you page flippers. I like hearing that. Young people don't even know what that sounds like. What is that? John 21. We're coming off of the resurrection. We're coming where Jesus has presented himself to Mary. They're still living in this doubt. Imagine just still being them, trying to put it all together. You ever just try to put something together in your life and it just doesn't really make sense? They're just still trying to get through the day, probably having seen this Jesus the Messiah come and be with them. He had relationship with them, and then he was taken away, beaten brutally, hung on a tree, and left for dead. And what did they do? They had the dispersion. They disappeared. They fled. Most of them were cowards, like probably you and I would be. When we see our hero, when we didn't understand what happened, and we go, oh, I don't know what I believe anymore. We walk away, put our heads down in doubt and shame. So Jesus comes to them again. I'm going to start reading verse 1. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet his disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? They answered him, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple in whom Jesus loved, therefore said to Peter, so this is John, looks to Peter, it is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish. So just get a picture. Peter's there. Got to give this cat some credit. He had denied Christ 3 times. He had done all this stuff, and then all of a sudden, he sees again. It said Jesus came to them again. Have you had Jesus come to you again? After you messed up, he keeps coming, right? He's like the Energizer Bunny. Just like, hey, here I am. What's going to keep coming after you? And he shows up, and Peter, this is the part I love about Peter. Peter just like, game on, I'm in. So go back to where he was walking out of the boat. This time he just put on his cloak and jumped in the water. He didn't try to walk. There's no reference to that. But he just jumped in, and all he wanted to do was be near Jesus. That's it. And that is just a kind of love and affection that I think is growing amongst us, not just for one another, but for Jesus in this season, where we're ready to jump out of the boat. We're really, we're like, we know we've messed up, much like Peter. We've known we've messed up. We know we have thought things we shouldn't have thought. We've done things we shouldn't do. We know that our actions, maybe even last night, weren't the thing, but he keeps coming back. He appears and he goes, he's like, hey, come here. And then he asks, the Savior of the world. Gosh, where was I? Think 9? Yep, you're right. Okay. The other disciples, verse 8. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging a net full of fish, for they were not far from land, but about 100 yards off. Me, if I'm on that boat, I'm like, dude, you wait and you help us bring the fish in before you go jumping out the boat. You're getting away from work. Some of y'all feel that? Like, there's impetuous Peter again. He's going to get out of work. He just jumps out of the boat and goes to them. And I just sort of attribute that to a beautiful Mary moment. Mary just wanting to be at the feet of Jesus. Didn't care what it took. Didn't worry about the fish. He just came in and said, cast on the other side. And there was an abundance of fish. Verse 9. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. Now, I know for sure there's a couple of people in here who know, but does anyone have any guess? This is the only other time this word for charcoal is mentioned in the New Testament. What was the first time? Anyone have any idea? Quiet, Rob. Ian. Bingo. Ding, ding, ding. There was a charcoal fire where Peter stood and when he denied Christ. That fire going. And I don't believe Peter was dumb. Here's Jesus cooking fish on a charcoal fire. So see, one point, we have to be reminded about our past. And we have to have a healthy representation of our past. We can't hide from our past. We have to emotionally process it. But at the same time, there's a future. We're called not to look behind, I would say, too much. An honest reflection of our lives is not a bad thing. But a dishonest one where you go into yourself and you go, man, I failed in so many ways. Younger people, I could ask a bunch of people here who are probably 40 and above who say, how many of us have messed up? And I think we would be done this church today of all of us over 40 something telling you how many times we've messed up. And we have not lived as Christ has called us to live. And that things have come out of our mouths and been in our heads and our emotions have been in a place. So there is nothing new under the sun with that. You're going to experience those same things. God calling. Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling. I have quite a lot of ADD today. What? The charcoal fire's there. There's a fish on it. Jesus said to them, bring us some of the fish that you have just caught. So here's Jesus. Like, wouldn't you think he's cooking a fish breakfast that he'd have enough? But he asked them, come bring some of this fish. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And if you spend as much time as I did with all the theologians trying to disperse what 153 meant, it's just too much. And the one I thought that was good, later they just proved that it couldn't be true because there was 157 species of fish, not 153. So I'm just going to tell you, just no one can agree, and generally most of the theologians go, we don't know what 153 means, except for that's the amount of fish they caught. All right? So no crazy thing there. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. And you know what the sound's like when you're pulling a net in and it's creaking? And it's like, oh. I had that experience. It wasn't a net, but it was a fishing line. And I was on a boat, and I was in the Choptank River, and we were fishing off of the airplane wreck. And you ever heard anyone heard of the airplane wreck? Okay, so we're there. That's like where I caught one of my biggest drum, my black drum there. It was just like that was the place, and we were cooking peelers off of there, and all of a sudden, I can't remember who it was, but went to bring up something. And that rod just sort of bent over, like dead weight bent over. If you ever caught a ray or a turtle on the ocean, it's dead weight. And if you're ever in the ocean and that rod's not going like this and it feels like there is something like whale on the other end, it's a turtle. And you're going to be there for hours. Just fun fact. But we were there and it's the middle of the day and all of a sudden it's like the rod's bent over and you can hear the string just like, and I'm like, easy. Let's what is this? Didn't think anything of it, and it's like, and you start seeing this massive thing appear. And I looked, and the hook was connected to wires from an airplane. And we grabbed it and pulled it up. It was the front instrument panel of the airplane wreck with the big round control. If you pick, those ones that go like this, it was that kind of plane. It was a big dog. It was like a 1940s, 50-some big dog. They're like, and we pulled it up and we're like, no way, and we're posting it everywhere. And I'm just like, we grabbed a hold of it. And we decided just to keep the, I don't even know what it's called. I used to fly, but there's a name for it. Throttle arm and control setting. So we ended up, we saw the whole instrument panel. And we're just like three of us out there going, no way, this is awesome, right? But, we heard the strain of that line, and so we brought it up and we looked at it, and I thought I'd keep that, and I was going to donate it to the museum. And after about a week, being in the salt water and out of the salt water, it just demolished in no time. It just died. I was so sad because I posted pictures of it on a bunch of fishing sites. Like, historians were all excited and stuff, but we caught the airplane. It was so cool. But that line, you're just like begging. Y'all had a fish on it, you just begging. Please don't go. Please don't go. And I just imagine with all those fish on there, any fisherman will get it. Please don't break that net. Because you break a little bit and those fish start going, what's going to happen? They're all going to be gone. But he's pulled. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now, none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Now we get to this piece that most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with. Jesus is still there with Peter. Verse 15. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to them, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." He just said to them, "Come feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This is said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. After saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." The brutality of those three questions. But I want you to see in the supernatural a little bit. I want you to think back to Ezekiel. I want you to picture the idea that from the temple, so that coal is another thing. There was a coal that was kept burning at the temple as well in the Old Testament. But this water in Ezekiel flowing out is not just a picture of water and fish and stuff. It is a spiritual message that the temple was going to be rent, and Jesus was going to be resurrected, and that water was going to flow through him. Out of my body shall flow rivers of living water. And it was going to flow, and it's going to be so deep that it would take a dead sea and produce life. Can you see the salvation picture here? That living water was going to come, and that it would take God's people to carry that out. I should make you fishers of men. So when the temple was rent, Jesus presents himself and says, "Do you love me?" Then what is the answer? It is to feed my sheep. It is to feed my lambs. Our ministry should be to feed one another. To feed one another with encouragement, to feed one another with a challenge, to feed one another through study in the mind. That's what's going on upstairs for those kids. Hopefully they are learning more that they're going to be able to apply when they get older. But for us, we're called to learn, but we're called to make fishers of men. And we are to go out and called to be disciples. And Peter, after all his failures, Peter was not a theologian. Peter was a fisherman. You do not have to be a theologian. You do not have to have degrees in order to share the goodness of Jesus Christ. I have had more than a handful of people say to me, "Well, I'm not the theologian you are." And I'm like, I don't give a rip about that. Do you love Jesus? Do you love Jesus? Then what? Feed my sheep. So all of us, in one way, shape, or form, have to come to the fact that we have denied Christ, and that he keeps coming back. He keeps coming on shore and saying, "Come and eat with me." Remember that from last week? I come knocking on the door, Revelation 3:20. I want to come in and sup with you. I want to have a relationship with you. You're here this morning and you have been walking away from God, and he's just like, "I want to come in and have a relationship. I actually want to cook you some fish. And I might ask you, do you love me?" And that's when our anxiety and fear comes in, right? "Well, Jesus, I don't love you enough. Well, Jesus, I'm a failure. Well, Jesus, you don't know what I did last summer. Well, Jesus, you don't know what I did last night. Well, Jesus, you don't know what was on my web browser. Well, Jesus, you don't know this, that, the other, what I injected into my body. Jesus, you don't know. And he says, do you love me? This is more than an intellectual love. This is a love that we cannot understand, that comes into us. And he says, do you love me? And we have to either just go yes or no. So this morning, you don't have to answer, but do you love Jesus? And if you do, then he's saying, then live your life and feed my sheep. I believe that's to all of us. It starts somewhere. It starts somewhere. If all we're doing is gathering intellectual information, and that's where the gauges, and I'm sorry I don't have time to explain it for those who aren't normally around here, the gauges aren't just about us mentally being smart people. They're supposed to be balanced with our mental and our spiritual and our emotional and our physical. Thank you. We're supposed to be balanced with that. We're supposed to be a balanced people. Because sometimes some people can be so spiritually strong they are no earthly good. Well, I'm just waiting for Jesus to come back. Are you feeding the sheep? Now, I ain't worried about that. I am just going to wait and sit here on my log and be a bump on the log and wait for Jesus to come back. Because, boy, I'll be glad. What a day that will be when my Jesus I shall see. Well, Jesus is asking you today to see him. We don't have to wait. Question, do you believe that? What Mandy, the video she shared, do you believe that you're in a war, that you're in a battle? Do you believe that we're in a war in our country and in a battle? It all starts with God's people. Judgment begins the household of God. But not just judgment. A river, living water, which will make a dead sea produce a harvest, which will make new trees grow and bring forth fruit. I remember one of the things that stuck with me in my head was there was a song about it. Someone's going to remember what it is. I don't. But it's talking about when I get to heaven and I feel like I haven't really done a lot with my walk. You ever just going, man, I haven't done enough, right? And this guy's in heaven just sort of still beating himself up. And then there's this person there that he taught like in a fourth grader, as a fourth grade kid who just grew and flourished. And that little kid looked back and it's like, that's who showed me. So your impact might not be as noticeable by your physical eyes, but if you're feeding God's sheep, you have no idea the depth that God wants for you to experience. Peter experienced it. Peter later died on the cross upside down because he didn't see himself worthy to die how Jesus died. Jesus, who denied Christ, was still used mightily by Christ. It is not too late for any of you. For any of you, it is not too late. And so in a moment, we're going to, like we did last week, for those of you who weren't here, we're started communion back, but we're also going to have prayer. Now I want to invite anyone who wants to come up. Actually, if you're willing, when we start, if you're willing to pray for people, just come jump up here. And I'm going to invite any of y'all, you can come pray. You can take communion, take it yourself. But if you want prayer, come up here and receive prayer. Grab someone you're comfortable with. And just say, hey, I've not been feeding any sheep. I've been that sheep that's been lost in a cave that's let his hair grow over its eyes. Y'all seen that sheep? I mean, it had like 60 pounds of hair or whatever it's called, wool. And it just sat and it could barely move. It got so fat. It just sat alone. It kept eating. But the wool grew over its eyes. Started to focus in on itself. But it wasn't until that sheep was rescued and the wool was sheared off that we saw new life. This world needs new life. Some of you in here may need new life. Some of you need to take part in watching living water go out into a dead sea and just cast those seeds. Say, this is what Jesus has done for me. This is what Jesus has done for me. This is who he is. I am not on my own strength, but I follow the one who gives me. This morning, there's three sets of you this morning when it comes to communion. I said it last week. You can do a flyby. You don't want to be embarrassed or whatever, you can stay in your seat. I don't care, but you can come by here and just walk right on. Do a flyby. 2, you can come up here and you can take communion joyously and just go, God, I'm not there. I'm not doing everything, but Lord, you're working in me, and I'm so thankful. Do you ever do that? I can sit here and look around here and just go, look at what God is doing in some of your lives. And just be like, yes, but what do? We minimize that stuff. Oh, I'm not good enough. But you can just come and revel in how good God has been to you and thank him for it. And maybe if you want to come for prayer, maybe it's your first time, you just want to acknowledge Jesus. But yeah, I've been doubting, I haven't trusted, but I want to pray with somebody about accepting Christ. Please do that as well. Could you please stand, and Rick, come on up, bud. And if you're willing to pray, yeah, just please come up forward, please. Communion is a serious thing. It reminds us of the seriousness of the cross. Communion is also a glorious thing. It reminds us of what God has done for us. Communion is a reminder that we need to be transparent before God with who we are. So I'm going to look. Yeah, I know these people. None of these people are here to judge you. They just want to encourage you and pray over you. So take this opportunity as we come to communion together. Please come.